Baker Mayfield, this is going to be a big season for him, right? He's got some elite weapons in Emeka Egbuka, right? He's got some interesting characters in that offense, right? Chris Godwin obviously maturing as a player and things of that nature. The running back room looking dynamic as well. This is a team, after getting Ruben Bain, who's looking to really build itself from a defensive identity. And I mean that holistically, because it seems like Baker Mayfield isn't as big of a priority as
he was supposed to be. A mistake. 5 rounds late, a punchline. And now he's the reason an entire city can't stop talking. Cleveland has broken quarterbacks before. It's broken hearts before. But something about this one feels different. Something about the kid wearing number 2 feels like it might actually be the answer nobody in this city has believed in for 25 years. Let's rewind for a second, because to understand why this moment matters, you have to understand the fall first. Shedeur Sanders walked into the 2025 draft with a resume that should have made him a top 5 pick. Elite production, a famous last name, a game that looked on tape like it belonged on Sundays. Scouts had talked about him for years like he was a lock, like the only question was which team would be lucky enough to get him. And then round after round passed. Team after team said no. Round 1 came and went. Round 2 came and went. By the time round 3 rolled around and his name still hadn't been called, something in the room started to shift. You could see it. You could feel it through the screen. By the time Cleveland finally called his name in the 5th round, the story wasn't about his talent anymore. It was about the fall. It was about the humiliation. Cameras caught him in that draft room, waiting, smiling through something that had to hurt more than he ever let on. Every network kept cutting back to that room. Every commentator kept asking the same question out loud. What happened? What do 31 other front offices know that the rest of us don't? That's the thing people forget about pressure. It doesn't always look like pressure from the outside. Sometimes it just looks like a kid trying to keep his composure while the whole country watches him get passed over, again and again and again, on live television, with cameras zoomed in on his face, waiting for him to crack. He didn't crack. Not on camera anyway. But make no mistake, that day left a mark. You don't go through something like that and walk away unaffected. You carry it. And for Shedeur Sanders, that day became fuel instead of a wound. That's the first turn in this story, the one most people scrolled past without noticing. So he gets to Cleveland. And Cleveland, of all places, is not exactly a soft landing. This is a franchise that has churned through starting quarterbacks like it's some kind of curse nobody can lift. Since the team came back in 1999, they've started something like 30 different quarterbacks. 30. Fans there don't hope anymore. They brace. They've seen too many saviors come and go. Guys who were supposed to be the answer and instead became just another name on a list nobody wants to remember. And the noise started almost immediately. Analysts picked apart his footwork, his arm strength, his decision-making. There were think pieces asking whether the name Sanders was doing more work than the player himself, whether he was famous first and good second, whether Deion Sanders' shadow was the only reason cameras followed his son around a practice field in Berea, Ohio. That's a brutal thing to have hanging over you before you've even thrown a real NFL pass. Imagine every good throw getting credited to hype, and every bad throw getting used as proof that the doubters were right all along. But here's where it gets interesting, because while the outside world was busy writing him off, something else was happening inside that building in Berea. He got his shot faster than anyone expected. Injuries opened a door, and Sanders didn't just walk through it, he ran. Coaches started noticing something in practice that doesn't always show up in scouting reports: poise. The kind of calm that either exists in a player or it doesn't. You can't coach it. You either have it in your chest when the lights come on or you don't. Then the numbers started rolling in from his rookie year. 7 starts, 1,400 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Look at that stat line honestly for a second. It's not a highlight reel. It's uneven. It's a young quarterback getting hit with the speed of the NFL for the first time and figuring out in real time how to survive it. There were weeks where he looked like a rookie completely out of his depth, getting rattled by pressure he'd never seen at the college level. And then there were flashes, a touchdown to Jerry Jeudy against Tennessee in December that had the crowd on its feet, drives where he looked completely unbothered by the moment, like he belonged there all along. That contrast, week to week, game to game, is exactly why nobody can agree on what they're looking at.
Extension. And hey man, look, Baker Mayfield was very honest about how he felt about the situation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've told you guys I've been pretty upfront and honest about my feelings about Tampa. It being home for now our family, we're raising kids here. We love it here. I wanted the deal done and set the deadline and told them it was going to be all ball after that. And I did mean that. And I don't know if they thought I was just going to take some of the offers that they gave, but...
And that's exactly where the criticism came roaring back. One of the loudest voices in football media didn't hold back. The Athletic's Nick Baumgardner looked at Sanders and didn't see a franchise savior. He saw a career backup. He compared him point blank to journeyman quarterbacks who've had long careers without ever being the guy a franchise builds around. Names like Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater. Solid, serviceable, never special. He basically said that when he looks past the last name, past the noise, past the marketing, what he sees on the field is a game manager at best, not a franchise cornerstone. Now sit with that for a second. Imagine being 22 years old, having grown up with cameras on you your entire life, having heard generational talent since high school, and now hearing a national NFL analyst say out loud, on the record, that your ceiling is a career backup. Not bust, not disappointment, something almost worse. Adequate, forgettable. That's not just criticism, that's a gut punch. But this is where the story stops being about doubt and starts being about something else, belief. Because not everyone in Cleveland was ready to write him off. Former Browns safety turned analyst Tyvis Powell went on the air and said something that cut through all the noise. He pointed at the Browns' offseason moves, the investment in the offensive line, the protection being built around this young quarterback, and he said it plainly. This isn't a team hedging. This is a team trying to find out once and for all if Shedeur Sanders is their guy. Powell put it simply, the front office was operating like they wanted to give him a real opportunity to prove he's the franchise answer. He went further than that too. Powell pointed out something that a lot of casual fans miss when they're just looking at box scores. He talked about how Sanders held the ball longer than almost anyone else on that roster last season, which meant he was getting hit more, absorbing more punishment, playing behind a line that wasn't holding up its end of the deal. So when the front office turned around and reinvested in that offensive line this offseason, re-signing veterans, adding depth, Powell read that as a message, not a hedge, a commitment. Protect the guy you're building around. That's a heavy thing to hear if you're a fan who's had your hopes stomped on so many times before. Because in Cleveland, hope has a price. It's cost people years of their lives, remotes thrown at televisions, relationships strained over Sunday afternoons that ended in interceptions and heartbreak. So when someone inside the building starts talking like this rookie might actually be different, you feel it, even if you're scared to believe it, even if some part of you is bracing for the letdown before it even happens. And then training camp of 2026 arrived, and this is where the story really starts to shift. Sanders wasn't just competing anymore, he was winning reps. Head-to-head with veteran Deshaun Watson, a former #1 overall pick trying to come back from a devastating injury, Sanders held his own, and on more than one practice, he outright outplayed him. 4 touchdown passes in a single camp session, a completion percentage hovering above 70%.
Other quarterbacks and peers and evaluate myself based on that and put myself in certain categories that I deserve to be compensated for that. And I think I'm a franchise quarterback. I've been told I'm a franchise quarterback. It's been said publicly from ownership down here. And so to not have a deal done is very disappointing. But I said the deadline was a deadline, and I addressed the team to let them know I meant that. It's all ball. I'm with these guys. I think all the guys that have been here know exactly who I am. The guys that are new here, I wanted to address that because they might have.
And camp wasn't perfect either. There was a day he threw his first interception in weeks, a ball that sailed a little high, a read that came half a second too late. In a normal camp, a normal quarterback battle, that's the kind of moment that gets buried in a stat sheet. But when you're the guy everyone's watching, when you're the storyline the whole league is tracking, every single mistake gets its own headline. That's the tax he pays for the attention. That's the tax he's always paid, ever since that draft room. Nothing gets to just happen quietly. Everything gets magnified, good or bad. Out in the stands, fans started noticing something too. Not just the stat lines, but the body language. The way he carried himself between snaps. The way he talked to linemen after a busted protection instead of turning around and pointing fingers. Little things. The kind of things that don't show up on a broadcast unless the cameras happen to catch it. But the kind of things that build a locker room's trust in a quarterback far more than any highlight reel touchdown ever could. Social media, predictably, split right down the middle. Half the timeline treating every good rep like proof the debate was already over. The other half treating every incomplete pass like evidence the whole thing was a mirage built on name recognition and wishful thinking. That's the environment this young man is operating every single day. Not just competing for a job, but competing for a narrative, in real time, in front of millions of people who've already made up their minds about who he is before he's even finished proving it. His own head coach noticed the growth too. Todd Monken talked about how far Sanders had come. Not in flashy terms, but in the boring, unglamorous stuff that actually wins football games. His reads, his timing getting the ball out, his grasp of the offense. The kind of growth that doesn't trend on social media, but shows up on Sundays when it matters. Monken didn't sound like a coach humoring a fifth-round pick. He sounded like a coach who was genuinely impressed by how far this young man had come in less than a full calendar year. And Sanders himself, when he talks, doesn't sound like a guy chasing a headline. He sounds like a guy trying to build something. He talked about pulling his teammates together in Miami during the offseason, a trip that wasn't about vacation, it was about connection, about getting a group of young players who'd been through a rough rookie season to trust each other before they ever stepped foot in a huddle together again. He said it himself, that the space they're all in now feels different, more confident, more connected. That's not something you fake. That's not a soundbite built for cameras. That's a young quarterback trying to be a leader before the league has even decided if he's allowed to be one. Think about that for a second. Most rookies, most second-year players even, are just trying to survive, trying to keep their job, trying to not get benched or cut. Sanders was out there organizing his own teammates on his own time, on his own dime, trying to build chemistry that no playbook can install. That's a different kind of confidence. That's the kind of thing that either ages beautifully or gets mocked mercilessly depending on how the season goes. There's no in-between with a move like that. But let's be honest with each other for a second, because this story isn't wrapped in a bow yet. The Browns haven't named a starter. Watson is still there, still the presumptive guy in a lot of eyes, still owed the kind of money that makes front offices reluctant to move on from him no matter what happens on the practice field. There's real chatter that Cleveland could still go after another quarterback in next year's draft, no matter what happens this season. Analysts around the league keep bringing up 2027 like it's inevitable, like this front office simply can't help itself when it comes to chasing the next guy. The safety net under Sanders is thin. Every practice matters. Every rep is an audition that never really ends.
So, going from that to some actual football, right? Because as he said, he's an alls, balls type of guy. You know what I'm saying? Baker Mayfield just be spraying balls all over the place. So, now, speaking of AO, this is a crazy catch. And don't even worry about the catch. Don't even worry about the great catch by Tez Johnson. But I want you, saucy freaking catch by Tez Johnson. That kind of made me uncomfortable. Saucy freaking catch. I don't know what that means, James Hill. But good camera work, James Hill. I'll give that to you as Tez Johnson on.
And that's the tension that makes this story impossible to look away from. Because on one side, you've got a national analyst who's already decided this kid's ceiling is backup quarterback. And on the other, you've got people inside the building, people who watch him every single day, who think they might be looking at the guy who finally ends Cleveland's quarterback curse. Somewhere between those two extremes is the truth, and nobody, not the analysts, not the fans, not even Sanders himself, knows exactly where it lands yet. That's what makes this must-watch television going into this season. If this kind of story pulls you in, the underdog, the doubt, the quiet belief building behind the scenes, do yourself a favor and hit subscribe, because this Browns quarterback battle is about to get a lot louder before it gets quiet. Here's what should scare every team that passed on him 5 times in that draft. Sanders doesn't talk like a guy who's satisfied just being in the building. He talks like a guy still carrying the chip from that draft night, still remembering every team that said no, still remembering every talking head who used his name like an insult instead of a legacy. And maybe that's the part of this story that gets lost in the stat sheets and the depth charts. This was never just about arm talent or footwork. It was about a kid who got humiliated on national television, who had to sit there and smile through round after round of rejection, and instead of letting that break him, used it as fuel. There's something almost poetic about it too, if you step back far enough. This is the son of a man who redefined what confidence looked like at every level of football he ever touched. Growing up in that house means growing up with a certain standard, a certain expectation that you don't just play the position, you own it. Whatever people think about the noise that sometimes follows that family, whatever people think about the swagger, none of it matters if the tape doesn't back it up. And slowly, rep by rep, camp by camp, the tape is starting to back it up. But that name is also its own kind of prison. Every other rookie who gets passed over 5 times gets to disappear for a while, gets to work in relative quiet, out of the spotlight, and re-emerge later with a redemption story nobody saw coming. Sanders never got that luxury. Every practice rep in Berea gets filmed. Every interview gets clipped and reposted 1,000 times before he's even walked off the podium. There is no quiet corner for him to fail in private and grow without an audience. His entire journey, the good throws and the bad ones, the confident answers and the tired ones, all of it happens in front of a camera. That's a different kind of pressure than almost any other player in this league is dealing with right now. And it's worth remembering that every time you watch a clip of him and form an opinion in 4 seconds flat. And yet, somehow, he keeps showing up looking like himself. Not performing calm, not faking confidence for the cameras, just steady.
Coaches who've been around a long time, who've seen plenty of hyped-up rookies crumbled the first time real adversity hit them, keep circling back to that same word, poise. It shows up in the interviews, it shows up in the huddle, it even showed up in that draft room when the whole country was staring at him wondering if he'd break down on live television. He didn't. And whatever you think about him as a passer right now, that alone should count for something.
Addition to the room has been Ted Hurst. What are your impressions of him, his progress so far, and potential role within the offense?
I've been very pleased with Ted, man. He's come in and just kept his head down and he's worked. Like, he has a great personality. Came in, joking, like he's very vibrant personality. He's a very good guy, like legit, like 6'4", and he moves really good for a guy that's that size. Like, he has a lot of twitch, and his ball skills are they're really good. Like, he tracks the ball well.
Cleveland has seen quarterbacks come in with hype before. Big names, big contracts, big promises. What they haven't seen in a long time is a quarterback who was counted out before he even got here, quietly outworking that narrative, one practice rep at a time. No fireworks, no demands. Just the quiet, stubborn accumulation of good days stacked on top of each other until people are forced to notice. Nobody knows yet how this season ends. Maybe Watson reclaims the job and Sanders spends another year proving himself in relief appearances, waiting for his next real chance. Maybe the kid from the 5th round wins the job outright, and Cleveland finally, after decades of false starts, has found its guy. Maybe the whole thing falls apart in October, and the critics get to say they told you so, and this whole storyline becomes just another cautionary tale in a franchise full of them. Think about what's actually riding on this for the organization itself. This isn't just about one player's career arc anymore. It's about a franchise that has spent a quarter of a century trying to solve the single hardest problem in professional sports and coming up empty every single time. Every failed era gets remembered by name. Every quarterback who came in with promise and left with regret becomes another chapter in a book nobody in Cleveland wants to keep writing. If Sanders is the answer, this isn't just a good story, it's the story, the one that finally breaks the pattern. And if he isn't, it's simply the next chapter in a book that already has too many. That's why every single practice rep gets treated like it's life or death by the fans watching from home. Not because they're irrational, because they've been burned enough times to know exactly how quickly hope in this city can turn into heartbreak. And they're watching this one closer than almost any quarterback competition in recent memory, because deep down, some part of them wants to believe this could actually be the one that's different. But right now, in this moment, heading into the season, there's a genuine, real belief building inside that building in Berea. Coaches see it, analysts who cover the team every single day see it, teammates who chose to spend their offseason with him in Miami instead of scattering across the country see it. Even some of the harshest critics are starting to hedge just a little, starting to admit that maybe, just maybe, they wrote this one off too early. And somewhere out there, Shedeur Sanders is still waking up every morning with something to prove. Not to the league, not to the doubters, to himself. Because at the end of the day, that's the only opponent that's ever really mattered to a competitor like this. Not Baumgartner, not the 31 teams that passed on him, just the version of himself that knows exactly how good he's capable of being and isn't satisfied until everyone else sees it too. That's the story worth watching. Not because it's finished, because it isn't. Because right now, in real time, a kid the league said wasn't good enough is quietly trying to prove that every single one of those teams was wrong. And if he pulls it off, Cleveland won't just get a quarterback. They'll get the story this franchise has been chasing for 25 years. A story that started with humiliation in a draft room and might just end with a city finally, after all this time, believing in someone again.